I think it might make developers more productive, that's for sure, but I don't think it's replacing anyone just yet.
Hello, guys. Welcome to Project Neo, the podcast where we talk about tech and personal development. I'm Faith Morante, and we are interviewing Maxi Ferreira, a staff front-end engineer at Help Scout. I found out about him when he released his free, not paid, 10-lesson course about front-end architecture. You should definitely check it out. It's at Front and at Scale. He's a very generous person, not only with his time, but also with his knowledge. It is very evident throughout this episode. Okay, hi Maxi. So nice to have you here in the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is great. How are you?
I'm good, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good, doing good. Yeah, it's Sunday. It's raining, which is nice because it never rains here, and I like the rain. So yeah, it's my kind of day.
It's the opposite for me. It's bright and sunny today, and I love it.
Okay, nice.
But I wish I was more outdoorsy. I didn't go out anywhere today. I was all alone at home. All right. Let's kick it off. Can you introduce more about yourself and say one or two things that you're working on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm Maxi Ferreira. I work as a front-end architect at Help Scout. That's my day job. On nights and weekends, I write a newsletter that's called Front End at Scale, which is it's about front-end architecture and software design and those kind of topics, always from a front-end perspective. Yeah, so what interesting things I'm working on right now? Well, at work, I'm tackling a quite interesting project, sort of modernizing our traditional SPA architecture for a front layer. We had these single page applications that run entirely on the browser with a PHP backend, and we're trying to modernize that with a TypeScript backend now. So bringing a lot of cool new technology like TRPC and BUN and all that nice stuff. So yeah, doing a lot of interesting work on that area. And then for my side projects, I have a few things that I'm thinking about. One of the things that I've been doing a bit of more research lately is on trying to create this catalog of software design concepts so that I can put them together in a more organized way. I don't know yet what this is gonna become, but I'm hoping it's gonna become some sort of a short book or screencast or something explaining topics like cohesion and coupling and that kind of thing from a front end perspective. So yeah.
That is a lot of things. That is a lot about front end as well. That is something that actually also is my passion. So, what is it about front end? I'm pretty sure you didn't start off maybe as a front end. Maybe you can correct me on that. But what is it about that front end that really excites you?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're right that I didn't start as a front end developer. When I was starting out, I was more like a generalist web developer. I don't think the term front end developer existed back when I started doing coding professionally, which was in the late 2000s, around 2007 or 8. So I was doing PHP development and MySQL and with jQuery, some Flash as well. So there was a typical day for me was doing some PHP in the morning, some SQL in the afternoon, and some Flash in the evening. And so I worked across the entire stack in a single day, which was common back in the day. It was pretty standard for someone who worked on web development. But I think in 2011 or so, I switched jobs and I decided to focus on a purely front-end career, which was my role was as a UI engineer. So that's when I started working with more modern at the time frameworks like Backbone and Angular and that type of stuff. But yeah, I decided to switch to front-end exclusively, mainly because I just really like the visual aspect of it. I liked the fact that you can actually see the results of your work, and also because I really like working with as close as possible to the customers. If I have a direct line of communication, I can see who the customers are and I can see them using my application. That's something that always motivates me to do my best work. So I really like that area. Just try to, UI in general. These days is not so much. I'm not working in UI as much. I'm working more on the backend side of things. Front end perspective, I'm more on the architecture side. So I'm not doing a lot of UI work these days. But yeah, that continues to be sort of my passion. Yeah.
That is amazing. That is so great. Would you say that a front-end engineer should be a people person?
I think not necessarily. I don't think you need to be a people person. I don't even know if I would consider myself to be a people person
Compare it to a
necessarily.
back-end dev.
I think there is more overlap with the world of like product design and maybe product design and product management and that sort of stuff than backend development, which comes with this extra. I like to say that a part of our job is to have this high like sense of user empathy. Like we sort of are the like the connection between the backend and the real customers. I think it helps to be working with, if you can, to talk to customers. I think it helps a lot. Really like about my job at Help Scout is that, well, Help Scout is a customer support platform, and one of the practices that we do is we all spend some time in the queue answering questions from customers every month. Every month we all have to spend some time answering questions, and I think that helps a lot because it really it really makes you see the pains or not or like how happy customers are thanks to your results. There are a lot of things that we overlook, especially when we work on UI. Maybe we don't think about too much about keyboard shortcuts or about the fact that when you close a tab, then, or I don't know, little things that when you're working on the app, maybe you think, oh, this is a little detail, no one's really gonna notice this. But then when you see a customer trying to use the app that you built for their work, so they're actually working with your app, paper cuts that could be improved, really motivates you to, oh, I could do a better job here. I could spend a little bit more time making this like a truly delightful experience for customers, and not just in that I have to push across the finish line because I want to get my ticket done.
Yeah.
It kind of changes that perspective a little bit.
Yeah, I really like that's kind of like a product engineering mindset, right? Like getting to know what the user really wants and what they really need. Because sometimes we cannot just, rely on our assumptions. You touched on a term called user empathy. This is not something I am very familiar with, and maybe our audience doesn't know about it too. Can you expand more on that?
Yeah, I think I don't have a good definition for it. I borrowed this term from Katie Seiler Miller, I think is her name. I don't remember exactly if that's the right last name, but I think it's Seiler Miller. She's a front-end architect at Etsy, or at least she was until recently. I don't know if she's working at another company, but I remember reading an interview from her, and she was asked the question of whether she thought that front-end people will make good software architects, because typically that's a role that back-end oriented people tend to have. And she said that they definitely can be great software architects, because almost like this superpower to the table, which is user empathy. Like you can speak on behalf of your users. When maybe a backend or backend person will speak on behalf of the technology, perhaps a front-end person will speak on behalf of the users. And I think that's a really important thing to have in a diverse group, especially when we talk about architecture, that mindset, and bring that perspective and that context from what is the users actually experiencing.
Yeah, I really love that. I mean, as a front-end engineer myself, I think it's important to like talk to the users and then get to know their point of view. I think that's a superpower, right? Um,
Yeah.
do you train your because you're a staff engineer, right? Do you train your junior
Yes.
devs, your senior devs to have that kind of ability to understand? So this is why I was telling, like, does a front-end engineer have to be a people person? Because as we know, it's like software engineers tend to be very introverted, you know? So how do you train your engineers to be more to have more of this mindset?
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard. And it's not something that I do. Like, I don't have dedicated training sessions or anything like that. I don't do it explicitly, but it is within my responsibilities of my role as a staff engineer. I think this is the same on pretty much every company, that you have to, one of the things you have to do is help other people in your team grow and level up and increase their knowledge, not just technical knowledge, but also like their soft skills and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's something that there are many opportunities to do it. I think during code reviews is one of the probably the most common way that I have to let people know, not just leaving comments about the code and how the code looks, but also like manually testing their work and seeing if how the user experience feels and things like that. So I think there's opportunities there. There are opportunities for also for when, in the case of my company, when we have this direct access to customer experiences to sort of highlight those conversations and reach out to people and say, hey, these things you worked on, this customer is experiencing this problem. What can we do to make their lives a little bit easier? I wouldn't say those are all like entirely the responsibility of a staff engineer, but it helps if you are sort of aware of those things and you bring them up to them. They'll definitely appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that you touched on code reviews. Of course, that's like what you do, even if it's a good practice, even if you're a junior dev. I think reading code is something that is another skill apart from writing code. Do you agree on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's like you use different parts of your brain almost when you're writing than when you're reading code. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely agree with that.
Yeah. So on top of that question, how do you so on top of like reading codes, okay? How do you see bugs by just coding reviews? I mean, you have solved a lot of bugs, you have debugged tons of code. So how do you then go through the thought process of, I know you do manual testing, but do you do another do you have another thought process on how to execute a better code review?
Um, I'll say so. I like to focus the comment, like the comments, any comments that I leave on a code review, to not only on the style of like the code I was reading, because we now have pretty good tools for that. On the front end world, we have Prettier, we have linters, we have all those sorts of tools that kind of check automatically that the style of your code is complying with your standards and standards you may have. So I like to check for flow of data, like how the data is flowing through the different parts of the application. It could be from the backend to all the way to the front end. It could be the data flowing through a bunch of different components, like React components, for example, if you use React. I like to check for the things that we were talking about earlier, like coupling and cohesion and those kind of things that they're not always like super obvious, but
Yeah.
sometimes if you're familiar enough with the code base, you can see, okay, these two things are sharing too much data. They know too much about each other. This might cause problems in the future. And I think just being aware of what they're known as code smells, like being aware of those type of things. So these are things like, for example, one very common one is, I believe the name is preemptive generalization or something like a function or a component, whatever it is, in a format that is super generic, but you have one use case at this point. Like when you're creating like a super reusable, super generic function that you are not going to need in the future. Those type of things are good things to check for in code reviews. But yeah, it does require, I think it's on one end, it's easier to spot this type of things by reading someone else's code than by reading your own code, which is why I think code reviews are super, super useful. But at the same time, it's also hard because it requires you to both like zoom in to the code level and say, okay, this component, this function, how the code looks like from the perspective of that module, but also requires you to zoom out to see like, okay, how is this component related to all the other components in the application? It's
You're
kind of like a weird dynamic, but
you're touching on a lot of good points, and I'm coming on a perspective because um I go to mentorship sessions to bootcamp grads, like in BrainStation, for example, and I
Mhm.
find that these schools, universities, bootcamp grads don't touch on stuff like this that we're talking about. User empathy, like zooming in and zooming out on code reviews. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
the thing is, how do we educate people to know that before they even join the workforce? Like
Mm.
Like, what are the things? Because people, the audience of Project Neo, are mostly like entry level people, and
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure they haven't even thought about all this stuff that they're talking about. So maybe this is your chance to kind of like maybe provide like resources or like thought processes, frameworks on how to think better and how we can help them to stand out, when they're
Hmm.
joining the workforce.
Yeah, it's definitely hard because on one hand, it's these topics that we're talking about. They mostly, of course, I'm sure that you can grab like examples from your own experience of all the things we'll be talking about because you spent many years in the workforce. You work on a bunch of different projects. So when we're talking about zooming in and zooming out, you kind of know exactly what I mean. But people who don't have the experience, they aren't quite sure. They know the code, but they haven't been through this process of working on these different projects and perhaps working on super large code bases maintained by multiple number of teams, right? So it's very hard to cover these concepts in a classroom. I think what helps a lot is to have experience building projects that are as or that simulate a real working environment as much as possible. So working not just on a project by yourself, but maybe working with a small group of people, small team, all working towards solving the same problem. I think it also helps to not always ask people to start projects from scratch, from like a greenfield project.
Yeah.
So they get to decide everything and they have like a perfect scenario because in reality, most code bases aren't perfect. They're a mess, right? I think it helps to say, okay, we're going to grab some open source projects off of GitHub that has at least 3 or 4 years, that's been around for a few years at least, and that many people contribute to it. And we're going to try to make a change to this code base. And that the change can be very small, but the process of understanding the code base and navigating through all those different things will teach you a lot more than building like a to-do list in React or something like that. So I think there are things we can do, but they're hard. They're hard because anything that emulates a real working environment, it takes a lot of time.
I love that. I really, really love that because I ran for 3 months a work simulation program. But then I
Okay.
started with like creating Greenland projects. But I think
Hmm.
if I'm gonna run that mentorship program again, I'm gonna start with like 3 to 4 years, like what you said. I think that's like
Hmm.
open source projects because the messy code bases are the ones that you can really learn the most from.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so just still being on the topic of entry level devs, what hope could you give them in this era of AI?
That's uh, it's hard to imagine for me what it must be like um, sort of entering the workforce right now. I'm pretty sure this must be pretty scary. It is scary for us who already have like a career in this, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be scary for people joining the workforce. So there are a couple of things that I've learned from my own experience working with AI, which is really good, and I think you have to spend time with it to get better at being productive with it. I think it just helps to try to use it as much as possible, to not sort of neglect it or try to say, okay, this is not useful, because I know that people are still like skeptic about React and don't want to use it or they don't trust it. But I think it helps to spend a lot of time with it. Um, I would still say that in my experience, I noticed that the fundamentals, knowing what you're doing, like knowing the fundamentals, still is crucial. You can't build anything more complex than a to-do list with AI without knowing actually like the code that the AI is writing, because it's always gonna make mistakes. It's never gonna build a thing exactly as you ask it to. So you're always gonna have to go in and touch the code. And if you don't understand what the AI is doing, you won't be able to do that. So I don't think at this point it's gonna replace developers. I don't think it might make developers more productive, that's for sure, but I don't think it's replacing anyone just yet. I compare it right now to when I was starting to code. My very first job was not as a PHP developer, but was as a Dreamweaver developer. So I use Dreamweaver. I don't know if you remember Dreamweaver. It was like an old version of what today is Webflow and Wix and one of those website builders. So you could build a website without knowing any code because it has this visual interface. And it was pretty sophisticated. You could do really advanced stuff. You can run SQL queries and do all sorts of things without knowing any code at all. Just select drop downs and things in the UI. But it was buggy sometimes and it would break. And on this job that I had, I remember there was only one person who knew how to code. And anytime we were building something and the UI broke and you couldn't get it right what you wanted to do with the UI, you have to call this person and ask him to go into like the code tab and do his magic and touching the code. And then you can go back and keep working with Dreamweaver. So I like to think like AI is very similar in that sense. Like it can get you 80% of the way there, but sometimes it's gonna break. Sometimes you have to do something manually because it just, no matter how good your prompts and your structures are, it's never gonna get it right. So yeah, I think you have to understand the fundamentals.
That's amazing. I'm pretty sure people will find that very helpful. Your insights on AI and how we use that in our current jobs right now. Yeah, so what do you actually see in 5 to 10 years in the world of tech? Do you have any, projections?
it's it's hard to tell. Everything is changing. It feels like it's changing quite significantly or quite fast. One thing that I've noticed that is a trend that's been for at least the last couple of years, and I see that it's coming up more often now in the era of React, is this new role of like the product engineer. I don't know if you heard about this. Like some people are now hiring not for a front-end developer or for a back-end developer, not even for full stack developers. They want like product engineers who are not just able to work with front-end and back-end and AI, but you can do a little bit of design as well. They can make decisions from the product perspective. So it's like more like a generalist role, which is very similar to the role of the web developer from the 2000s or so. And I think we're coming back to a similar discipline where we're still going to have specialists, but we're going to see this more generalist roles become more popular in the future. That's my impression. I think AI is accelerating a lot of that because you can't, of course, be an expert at all of the things, but you can know just enough about all of these different disciplines and then let AI fill the gaps for you. So I think that might accelerate this movement of product engineering.
Yeah, so on the talk of generalists and specialists, that talks into depth and breadth, right? And I think you have touched on this on one of your newsletters. Can you talk more about what do devs have to focus on early on their careers and also when they're like more into mid or senior in their careers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. This is a concept that comes from, I believe, the first person who came up with this idea of what he calls the pyramid of knowledge is Mark Richards, who is one of the authors of this Fundamentals of Software Engineering book. And he talks about this difference a lot, about difference between technical depth, technical breadth, and how earlier in your career, I will say up to the senior level, like your job is to increase your depth of knowledge, of technical knowledge, as much as possible, to become a specialist in whatever area you decided to focus your career on. Could be front end, back end, databases, whatever it is. You want to know all the frameworks or the advanced stuff. And yeah, because that's your bread and butter, essentially. But then at that point, it becomes more, you'll have a bigger impact by starting to develop your technical breadth instead. So this is one of the things that I think for any staff engineer, any staff plus engineer, they will have to develop more awareness of other disciplines outside of the one that is where their area of expertise is. So in the case of a front-end developer, if you've always done front-end development, at that point, it might become more beneficial for you to focus on back-end development a little bit and data engineering and a little bit of product management and design and all these adjacent areas to front-end. because it will give you, or they'll help you understand more context and tackle bigger projects that require more context, that are a bit more ambiguous maybe. So you might have to lead a team that is that consists of many different developers and backend developers, front developers, product designers, and so on. And knowing just enough about all of these different disciplines will help you do a better job of that. So I think I'll say up to senior level, your focus should be on technical depth. But beyond that, you should focus more on technical breadth. One last thing I will say about this is that you don't want to completely neglect your technical depth at that point. It's not like you want to, okay, I'm going to learn about all these different things superficially, and I'm never going to go deep again. I think you have to retain a certain level of technical depth as well. That's why I always say that for anyone who's working on any of these super senior staff, principal engineers, architects, all those really high levels of the career ladder, I think it's very important for them to stay close to the code, at least to dedicate a percentage of their time working in code, even though they have other responsibilities. I think it's very important to stay too close to the code. Yeah.
Man, that is so useful, very insightful, Maxi. Thank you for that. I have another interesting question. Is there anything you wish in the tech industry that you wish more people understood?
I think, yeah, well, related to what we're just talking about, I think I wish we all knew a bit more about what other disciplines are responsible for. I think there was more empathy, if you want to call it, in that sense. That front-end developers know a bit more about what it entails to be like a back-end developer, and vice versa. Because I think this is kind of related to something that I covered in I believe was the last newsletter that I wrote, which is this devaluation of front-end development, how it's not treated as seriously as other disciplines because it might be seen as less technical. And I think a big reason for that is because the essentials of what it takes to build a website on the front-end side, like the basics of HTML and CSS and JavaScript, they are very simple to understand, which might lead people to believe who the entire discipline is just very simple. Everything is very easy. But anyone who who tries to build a modern website today will know that that's not the case. So I wish there was more of that, more that other people knowing a bit more about other things in other disciplines. Yeah.
Yeah, you can be an advocate for that front-end advocacy.
Front advocacy.
Okay.
That's a good. Yeah, that's a good thing. I think there are a lot of people. Well, not a lot of people. I've seen a lot of people like talking openly about this feeling of front end development not being given the respect it deserves.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Even for myself, like I would look down on myself just because how you see other people look at you, like, I'm just doing I'm just adding a button.
That, yeah, and I think that's a bit, and it becomes this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy where when you believe that your work is not as technical, you might start to think of, it's like this learned helplessness, like if you think of yourself, maybe I'm not smart enough to understand all these backend super advanced backend concept that all the backend engineers are talking about. They're talking about Kubernetes and all these things that I have no idea what they are. And then it becomes true because you don't think yourself as smart enough or technical enough or whatever it is to understand those things. So you never go there. You never try to understand it. But if you spend a little bit of time, which goes back to the concept of technical breadth, if you just spend a little bit of time and trying, okay, I know I understand what Kubernetes is doing at a high level. I'm not an expert, but I know that I can understand it because it's a concept that is not harder to understand than whatever it is that I'm doing with my reactivity and my signals and the UI, how they work and things like that. So yeah, I think it's a shame that the fact that our job is seen as less technical make us see ourselves as less technical, which prevent us from looking deeper into these other subjects.
Do you know this notion that people are thinking that AI can make front-end apps much quicker and much more useful than a backend interface or a backend code base? Have you heard of that?
That is more like efficient at building the front end layer than the back end layer. I haven't heard it, but I won't say Yeah, I guess that makes sense to some degree. I will say that all my experiences, I don't know what these benchmarks, all these different benchmarks they use to measure how efficient AIs are. If what they measure on the front end layer, are they measuring that they just build an app and it doesn't matter what the code looks like and it doesn't matter how the app looks like, as long as the app is doing whatever it was supposed to do? Or if they actually measure it against some real metrics. Because I think the hardest part of working with AIs is having them develop code that is consistent and that humans can maintain. Because at the end of the day, until the AIs are perfected and they manage 100% of the code still needs to be understandable by humans and by different teams. So you can't just ship whatever crappy code and messy code that AI may develop. So I think the quality of code is as important. It doesn't matter who writes it. I think it has to have some level of quality. Yeah, I don't see. Maybe it does produce better quality code for front end than for back end. That hasn't been my experience at least.
All right, awesome. Okay, let's now get a bit more personal. All right, is there a particular non-tech hobby or interest that has influenced your work in tech? Could be sports, TV shows, books, all those kind of things.
I don't have many hobbies. I have two young kids, which are my hobby, I guess. I'll say drawing with my kids is not really something that inspires a lot of software design concepts. But I say that one thing that I do like to do on my free time is read books. And I think reading all different types of books is this has proven to be beneficial for me. I think I like to read all sorts of things that are not related to tech, the usual personal development type of books on productivity and that kind of stuff. That helps a lot. And I think two types of books that I like to read that help me with my job in a more direct capacity that are not like technical books are any books on like this design thinking. I think the world of design, not just graphical design, but design as a concept. A lot of things that we can borrow from it, from like the concepts of prototyping and how to approach problems, how to think about problems, and that kind of thing. I think I really enjoy reading those type of books and trying to translate that to, okay, how do I apply this to my work? I think it's a good thought process to have. And also, I really like reading like management books, even though I'm not in the manager's path, what I call it. I don't have any people reporting to me or anything like that. But I do enjoy reading about what does it take to be a good manager? What does it take to be? Because there are a lot of like leadership advice in those books, which is important for senior ICs as well. So yeah, books are I guess that's my main hobby, reading books. It's not a very exciting hobby, but
It's a very
what
good
it is.
hobby. I love reading as well. Just for our listeners, could you cite one book for each of those categories?
Oh, okay. So for management, let me see. So I list a couple. So the Manager's Path by Camille Fournier is a classic. I think it's a very good book, and for anyone who's also trying to, I think the book describes really well the management in tech companies, in big and small tech companies. I think it gives you a nice perspective of what your boss is thinking, what your boss is expecting of you. I think that's a very good one. There is another book that's called Turn the Ship Around, which it's more like a leadership book. It's not really a management book. I know a lot of managers read it, but I think it has been helpful for me. It's about leading leaders in a way by not trying to like tell people what they should do, but also but let them make decisions, and how do you help them make those decisions by themselves. So it's a book that I really enjoy. And then from the design perspective, I should see if I have to list just one book. Well, there's the classic Design of Everyday Things. I think it's a very good book. It's a bit of a long read, and if you're not into design, it might become like a slow read. But another book that I'll say that is about design thinking, it's a book that is called Designing Your Life, and that book I think is more broadly applicable to more people. I think more people will enjoy that because it applies design thinking concepts to how do you design your life. It's more of like a self-help type of book, but from a design perspective. So I think that's a good one to recommend as well.
I'm very interested in how you process your thoughts towards reading a non-tech book and applying it to your job. Do you write like journals? Like what kind of framework do you have in your mind to like kind of structure those concepts,
Mm.
and apply that in your technical job?
So I think one thing that helps is that I also like to write a lot for not for my newsletter and also for myself. I like to write for like you said, like journaling. I just do a lot of like note taking for myself and reading books with that perspective of okay, I'm not just gonna try. I'm not trying to finish this book. I'm not trying to absorb the knowledge or to remember exactly what the book says. But I really we're always looking for okay, what can I learn from this book? And there's always a handful of lessons that the book can teach you that are good to capture. I don't take notes on the entirety of the book, but I try to take notes on when I'm reading the book and there's a concept that comes up and gives me an idea. Then I take a quick note about that, and then maybe that note doesn't become anything. Okay, no, this was just, I don't know what I was thinking. I'll just delete that note. But a lot of them then become what have other people said about this, and I do a little research on. Okay, there's a blog post from someone who connected these two docs already. And yeah, that's also my approach of like note taking. It's very light. I take notes on the ideas that I have while I'm reading the book, and I use them as reference. If a book discusses a topic, I take note of where in the book would that topic discussed, and then maybe I'll come back to it to reread that portion. But yeah, that's I guess my approach.
That is so awesome. I'll take that. I'll take that to myself, and because what I usually read are like leadership books.
Uh-huh.
Trying to read fiction again.
Nice.
Yeah.
What is your top one of your top leadership books to recommend?
I don't know if it's leadership, but more like about mindset. Like for example, Carol Dweck on mindset. That's one of my top
Mm-hmm.
like growth mindset. I love mental models by Farnham Street. They have like a lot
Okay.
of collections. I've only finished one volume. I'm working on the second volume, and they're, oh my God, like how he presents, like for example, science
Mm-hmm.
concepts, and then apply it into like your life, and how like apply it for your job, like how you see things. It's really
Nice.
amazing. Yeah, I also read a bit of biography, but I'm still trying it out. But do you read biographies?
Yeah. Oh, not really. I've read a few. I read like Steve Jobs and some of the popular ones, but yeah, it's not a genre that I read too often. Yeah.
All right. Okay. On the topic of biographies, so if you're gonna have a dinner with a tech leader, like a good personality or something like that, who would it be, and what would you ask them?
It's that's a hard one. I yeah, I
It could
would
be it could
love
be
to.
someone it could be someone that is not here anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really enjoy learning about the era from before I became like a software developer, like the how coding was in the, like the 80s or the 70s. Um, I really like to learn more about that. So I guess so. Fred Brooks passed away recently. He wrote the Mythical Man Month, which is well, also like one of my favorite books that I have here. I think he will be one of my top choices. So yeah, maybe him. I'll also say I would love to. Can I do two people? I know am I cheating,
Cheating.
but I'll also say because it came to mind that Joel Spolsky because he's the co-founder of Stack Overflow. He worked at Microsoft for a long time, and I'm not sure what he's doing these days, but he is one of my favorite writers, people who write about tech. Yeah, he's super funny, super easy to read, super technical, super like you can tell that he's a very smart person, but at the same time he doesn't. It's very it's just super fun to read what his articles. So would love to have dinner with him to get any writing advice that I can from him.
I see. I see. You're inspired by him. That's why like your newsletters are so fun too. And so like all these jokes, it's a breath of fresh air to be honest. I love funny articles or newsletters. What would you ask? What would you ask him?
I would love to know what's his process for sitting down and writing a piece. I think, yeah, I don't know. I love to. I get struggle a lot. I like to write, but I struggle a lot with it. Like it's not doesn't come easy for me at all.
Really?
It's painful.
That
It's painful.
I didn't see that from all your works.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I try to be the newsletter to be light because I know that talking about these concepts around software design, architecture, and that kind of stuff, it's kind of like it's boring. Like it's a boring thing to talk about. So I try to at least make it like a light version of that. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Okay, final question, Maxi. If there's one thing that you want to be remembered by, what would that be?
Ah, that's a tough question.
I love asking tough questions.
I um it's hard. It's hard. One thing that I always try to keep in mind is that I like to see myself as a generous person. I don't like to see myself as like a cheap person or someone who is overly ambitious or whatever. Like I see myself as a generous person. I hope that when I'm gone, that the people around me will consider me that. They will say that I was a generous person. So I guess that will be my pick.
Well, I can validate that myself from what you did for Frontend at Scale, doing all those more than 10 courses, more than 10 lessons for free. That is very, very generous. And I am so glad I have you in my podcast to tinker your brain and like get all these concepts and insights in you. I'm going to condense all of this, get all the wisdom and I'm going to share it to the whole world. Thank you so much, Maxi.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. This was great. Thanks,
Yeah,
great.
I'm very honored. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.